National Treasury on Tuesday published two papers on proposed retirement reforms for public comment. One of these papers is titled Encouraging South African Households to Save More for Retirement. It proposes that people save 1/3 of their retirement contributions in a pot they can access before retirement and 2/3 in a preservation pot. Government is of the view that preservation of contributions must accompany such restructuring to ensure sufficient retirement provision and avoid old age poverty, as well as reliance on the state. The proposed restructuring of retirement savings into an accessible pot and a retirement pot will address the situation most members of funds find themselves in because of not having any alternative form of short-term savings. And this proposal a sustainable solution? To answer that, I'm joined by SA Federation of Trade Unions General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi. Very good morning to you, Mr. Vavi. Thank you so much for your time. Government has essentially recognized that there might be a need to allow some access to these accumulated retirement savings. What's your take?
Well, that's a welcome news, and that's a step in the right direction. This is what we in the trade union movement have been calling for many, many years, that workers mustn't be allowed to starve to death at this moment whilst they're waiting to die. There is no life after death. We believe that everything must be done to, when workers are facing very special circumstances, allow them and to access at least 1/3 of their retirement funds and to intervene in circumstances that we hope we will be able to negotiate with the government. And so we're quite happy with that proposal. And we would have liked this proposal, though, to form part of a comprehensive social security system document that was tabled and withdrawn by the Department of Social Development. And we suspected that one of the driving forces behind that withdrawal of the paper was the Treasury, perhaps because they wanted to adopt this piecemeal approach of a retirement fund on another department and the rest of other social programs on another program. This is a fragmentization that is absolutely not necessary, but nevertheless, we welcome the fact that there is finally some clarity. The issue that we're going to have to contend with going forward as we discuss and engage with the discussion paper is the levels of poverty amongst workers themselves. The phenomenon of what we call the working poor, where far too many workers in South Africa are working every day but borrow even the money to go to work from Paul, and at the end of the month they get into such a crisis of having to pay back Paul in order to borrow another money from Peter on the other side. And that's the crisis that the encouragement of workers to save is going to have to confront with, that levels of poverty amongst the working people themselves makes it very difficult for them to save for their retirement, for their pension life. They can't save now. They are heavily indebted, and they are all battling with having to be listed by most of the financial institutions, and they end up in the doors of the Mashodisas day in and day out. That's the life of an ordinary worker in South Africa. And there is hardly anybody that we can call a middle class, because even the so-called middle class itself is so heavily indebted as they try to compete against each other to buy GTI and stay in flats that they cannot afford. So we're going to have to find a way of not just taking one silver bullet and hope that we're solving the problem. The bullet that we need to solve all of the problems in South Africa is the restructuring of the economy as a whole, and make it based on the need, the central need of creating jobs at a decent wage, at a living wage, jobs that will make workers to be able to save for their retirement and pensionable age, jobs that will allow them to take the workers out of poverty and to address the inequalities. That is another big factor in our country, as well as jobs that are going to help them take their kids to the schools of their choice, to the health services of their choice.
Do you not think that members who decide to go with this option may perhaps be at a disadvantage at a later stage where they find themselves withdrawing some of these funds, but withdrawing them without the correct financial savviness when it comes to how to use the money in order to ensure that come the actual retirement age that they're able to still utilize what they have, especially looking at the scarcity of jobs in the country at the moment?
Absolutely. One of the things we've got to open up a discussion on with the government as a whole is not just about how workers can access this one-third under very strict conditions, but it's also about whether we cannot design a system, a policy within the government employee pension fund, for example, where a portion of that collective saving of workers can be used to borrow workers money so that they can build their own homes now, not when they're in retirement. Service those loans and pay back those loans now before they get into retirement. And as long as you do not address that central need of both education and housing, then workers will always be under such a pressure to get money, to get, in fact, not just one-third, they're under pressure to get all of the pension, to take their kids to universities and technicons, to build themselves their homes because they are too poor to be banked by and to be assisted by the financial institutions, and yet they earn too much to be assisted through the government RTP housing program. And so they are in between. As long as we have these millions of workers who are in between the bank limits and the RTP limits, you're going to have a pressure of workers wanting to access all of their retirement funds now. So it can't be just about the one-third. It's going to be about how do we restructure the entire government employee pension fund such that as a collective, not as individuals, as collective, they cannot just play the role in funding the corporates to build glass buildings in the city centers of Sante, but they can also create a vehicle to borrow from in cases where they need money to build themselves their own houses.
Where does this then place the urgency of the conclusion or discussion going, even further when it comes to the minimum wage? Could that not be viewed as another solution which could perhaps assist in workers living hand to mouth?
Look, that's why from SAFCU point of view, we rejected that insultive 3,000, now 3,500 rands so-called digital minimum wage. We knew that when you give someone a 3,500, you're not liberating that person from poverty, inequality, and you are not liberating him from the debt trap that every worker is now facing. You are basically just lifting him above the water, and lifting them above the water does not even guarantee them food security, does not give them a right to have proteinous food that can feed their body. And so 3,500 remains absolutely inadequate. And that's why from a worker point of view, they have been inspired by the Marikana massacre of 2012, where workers stood for months to demand the 12,500. That demand for 12,500 remains a central demand for every worker, and how we wish that there will be no cleaner, no security, no worker in the informal sector, no everyone who will earn below 12,500. When you earn that, by the way, 12,500 is totally inadequate, because that was a figure that workers were demanding in 2012. In the mining industry, they are now into the 17, 18, 19,000 rands as their minimum wage. But for the rest of the economy, we are prepared to talk. The demand we want to push and continue to push it is for 12,500. In that package, then it becomes possible to negotiate that there must be compulsory retirement scheme for all workers in South Africa. In that way, government will not have to carry the burden of having to give these people that would have made such a sterling contribution in the development of the economy some pension in their later age. So that demand remains central. So is the demand that I was raising, the demand of overhauling the economy such that it can have a capacity to industrialize again, address the landless crisis of the black majority, address the property crisis of the majority, deliberately address the massive inequalities in the economy, and whilst at the same time ensuring that the economy grows and grows in a manner that it will redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor, and in a manner that it's going to address the principal demand of every South African.
Mr. Vavi, if you'll allow me very quickly, just for the sake of time, the second paper is titled Governance of Umbrella Funds, which overall seeks to improve governance, governance in the management of these retirement funds. What's your take on that, and what sort of contributions or insights should come from the public as they view this second paper?
That too is a very welcome paper. Look, there have not been too many scandals in South Africa where, because of poor governance, we end up having to have major corruption scandals involving workers' pensions and their retirement funds. I think that the management regime of the pensions and retirement fund have been solid. Not that there have been no problem. For example, if you look at the PIC Commission report, and that was led by three prominent South Africans, there were lots of eye-raising stories and scandals about how even that money was used to borrow recklessly to fed cats to build their empires at the expense of the people who are paying religiously their monthly contributions to the retirement fund. So any tightening of the screws to make sure that there is a better management, there's a tighter administration, and that there's accountability. But we want to insist, even in that, we've got to arrive in a situation in our country where workers can take control of their retirement funds. This business that workers outsource a responsibility to manage their retirement funds to the clever intellectuals elsewhere who redirect the entire retirement fund industry into building glass buildings in the city centers, whilst workers are trapped in a life of no infrastructure, no housing, no life where they live, is something that we must take as an opportunity as we comment to this paper to ensure that there is a fair distribution and that workers must through their pension and retirement funds build a better life first where they live, instead of going to work to see these glass buildings and going back to home to see squalor and poverty.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time and weighing in on this discussion. SA Federation of Trade Unions General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi speaking about these two bills that are being put forward when it comes to accessing retirement savings. And of course, they're open now for public comment.